everybody. I'm Pastor A.J. Houseman, and welcome to 10-Foot Pole, a podcast dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 21. Today our guest is the Reverend Seminarian Albie Nicol, who is studying for a Master's of Divinity to become a pastor at Trinity Lutheran Seminary in Columbus, Ohio. Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you. Hi. Hello.
This is very exciting to me for the folks that don't know who you are. That once upon a time, Albie was just a cute little high schooler in a church that I got to do fun stuff with as a youth and young adult leader. So it's really exciting for me to see that you're now an adult and in seminary and becoming a pastor. So.
Well, it's exciting for me because
I'll give John Fry most of the credit, but I'll take a little for myself.
I mean, I'm literally using the Bible from confirmation that was given to me by y'all. So
yeah,
we've got notes in here from Steve Ferguson and you and John and Drake. So it's a whole conglomerate over here. How do you get a trans and queer dude to seminary? Well, you give him the best youth leaders that you've got.
I love that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I will say sometimes I reflect where St. John is right now and where they were then it was kind of amazing the open and affirming space that we created with the youth. I am sometimes really kind of flabbergasted for how long ago that was and what we did.
Yeah.
And I will also credit some pretty awesome parents with that.
Yeah.
Yours being some of them.
Yeah. I mean, it's been an exciting ride with them. Yeah. And it's so interesting to just see their growth and the amount of times where I will come to them with something and they're like, let me think on that. And also let me look up what these words mean.
Yes.
Then I'll get back to you.
That's amazing. That is a good and faithful response. That's the kind of parent that I hope to be, to just be like, okay, I need to learn something and then we can talk about it. I love that. That's a good.
But so much of their acceptance journey is tied in with our congregations, well, with St. John's. And I think when people ask me about, how did you know that seminary would be the next right thing for you? It just felt like the natural step in my coming to my truest self. Because so much of my coming out and affirmation of that has been tied in with St. John's, the Lutheran Student Center, and then Three House. So my journey just continues here at Trinity.
That is beautiful to hear that your coming out journey and affirmation of who you are is coming out of church. I think that's not really what we've always heard, right? And what is many people's story. So I think for me to hear a young trans man say, hey, part of my identity and where I am and becoming who I am has been based in scripture and my community in the church.
Right.
That gives me so much hope for the future of Christianity. You have no idea.
I am so glad because that is one of my many goals in ministry is giving hope to Christians who are feeling kind of okay, what are we going to do with this tradition?
Yeah.
But also giving hope to queer trans people who are I can't find meaning either in Christianity or in my own personal life. And either providing them with, hey, this is what gives meaning to me, like maybe that would be a good fit for you. But I also think there's a lot of power just in the stories of, this is how I got here. How did you get to where you are?
Yeah. You
So,
tell that story a lot in seminary, for sure.
yeah. Yep.
Well, thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to have you. Let's dive into some Bible. So we're going to talk about this morning the gospel lesson, John chapter 10, verses 1 through 10, for Sunday, April 30th. For those that are going to go to church, it's the fourth Sunday of Easter. You'll hear this. This fourth Sunday of Easter is always Good Shepherd Sunday. So, you'll hear some form of this. So it's always some part of John chapter 10, because this is the Good Shepherd chunk, right? So, there's the lectionary is a 3-year cycle. So you'll hear 3 different parts of it, depending on the year. So, you don't ever actually get to hear the whole story. That would make way too much sense, but, then it'd be too long to, read a whole chapter. We only do that like once every few years for the woman at the well. That's the only one where we read the entire thing, and it's that gospel. We tell people, go ahead and sit, because it's that long, which I fully love and appreciate, that this woman is who gets the most airtime. Anyways, back to the Good Shepherd. So this Good Shepherd Sunday, so it's going to be all the shepherdy things. We're going to have Psalm 23, shepherd makes me lie down in green pastures, blah, 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 which is actually, scholars say is not related to the John Good Shepherd at all. Like that was not taken into account. Something about shepherd in the New Testament reading as well. Very shepherdy. And this image of Jesus as this good shepherd is one that has taken hold very, very much throughout history. But we're going to talk about it a little bit, and to say that the chunk that we have this year, this first part of John, is actually very light on the shepherd. It's very heavy on sort of Jesus being a gate, is actually the language here, which we talked about with Pastor Colleen, is one of the biblical images that we have for God, or our Trinity. All right, so I'm going to read it, chapter 10, verses 1 to 10, and I'm going to read the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition. Very truly, I tell you, remember very truly we talked about last week with Jess, is amen. Amen, amen. I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. The gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So the first thing to me that I think is really, really, really important to know when we read this is this is the longer part of the narrative of what happens in John chapter 9. So in John chapter 9 is where we hear this man who was born blind. And the disciples ask Jesus, well, is he blind because of his sins or because of his parents' sins? And Jesus is like, no, it's not how that works, everybody. And Jesus heals him. And then the Pharisees are like, who do you think you are? And so the Pharisees are really doing this sort of what we would call, quote, gatekeeping mentality to the church, right? And so Jesus, is talking about this. And so his full quote that he is responding to them actually starts with chapter 9, verse 41. Jesus says to them, if you were blind, you would not have sinned. Wait. Yeah. Jesus says to them, if you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, we see, your sin remains. Very truly, I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold okay. So it's just because we put this chapter and verse here, which we've talked about in the podcast before, is not authentic. Like that's stuff that we
Right.
came up with later that helps us navigate the Bible. That's what that's meant for. But it's not necessarily to mean this is one speech, this is another speech. But it's this ongoing thing. Like Jesus is still talking, right?
Yeah.
But we cut it out for the lectionary purpose because that's, then you have to go into this whole thing about a blind man. And it's like, well, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about Jesus being the good shepherd.
Right.
Which is sometimes where I think the lectionary does us disservice because it's like, well, wait, that's actually pretty integral into what he's talking about right there.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways. So what do you think as we dive into this?
I have a lot of thoughts.
I would love to hear all of your thoughts.
For context, I work in the seminary library, so my
Great.
resources are unmatched, unparalleled. But I read a lot about this text because I was excited and I wanted to think my ideas through the ideas of others. And so I first checked out the Queer Bible Commentary because I keep that thing strapped on me at all times. Um, and it says nothing
What queer
about
Bible do you have? Queer
the
commentary Bible.
I have I believe this is the not updated version, so the first. Um,
It's called the Queer Commentary Bible. Who are the people at the bottom?
The Queer Bible Commentary, edited by Darren Guest, Robert E. Goss, Mona West, and Thomas Bohatchee.
Okay.
So I love it. But there is an updated version by the same people that I love better. But it says nothing about the Good Shepherd text, which to me is
Wait, like the whole chapter 10?
the whole, yeah, it says nothing about it.
Wow.
Just not today. Which was wild. And so I think that's interesting because I really related to the thief and the robber imagery because we see um the anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate climbs in by another way is a thief and a bandit.
Yeah.
And a lot of my process through candidacy, through seminary, is there are these doors that are wide open for straight cisgender people, particularly men, but people in general, um, that aren't that accessible. You can't just walk through if you're anything outside of that demographic conglomerate.
Yeah.
And
So I'm gonna say just really quick before we started recording, Albie and I were kind of talking about our different journeys of going through candidacy and going to seminary. So candidacy being the process of sort of getting approval by a particular synod to be able to go to seminary and then become a pastor. And I shared that the advice I was given is just to do everything exactly by the book. So no one has any reason to question you, to in any way, shape, or form, do anything out of the ordinary to cause any problems, right? That you don't want to draw attention to yourself. That was the best advice that I got.
Well, and that's still pretty consistent with what is told today. Although it's a little bit different because now I don't remember which years you were going through candidacy, or your beginning years were, but I was just these past few years, having Proclaim as a community, has been really helpful. Um, and still, a lot of it's like, don't rock the boat. Um, but it feels in this text like rocking the boat is a bad vibe,
Mhm.
and I'm all about vibes. And so I was really frustrated because it's saying if you go through any unconventional way except through the gate and through Jesus, you are coming to kill and destroy. And
Yeah.
I don't think that's the vibe.
Yeah. Well, all right. So here I'll say this because this is sort of like what you're kind of like mapping out, right? Is like if you don't go through the front door, right? Like because you're right, especially as a queer candidate, you kind of have to open your own doors or find a back door or crawl
Right.
through a window. And so yeah, you read this text and you're like, ooh, is that me? Am I the thief or the bandit here?
Hmm.
And I'll challenge you and say this. Would Jesus actually make you do that? Or is that like really the church people that are setting you up to think that you're the thief or the bandit?
Yeah, that's that is a great challenge. And it leads into there was an article I was reading from the Christian Century,
Mm-hmm.
and the heading of this section is Will the Real Thief Please Stand Up?
I love that.
Um, the article is The Thief May Not Be Who You Think It Is by Craig Keener. And he has a quote. He says, That is the reason, that is the immediate setting for chapter 10, and the reason why the NIV adds Pharisees to Jesus' address. Very truly I tell you, and John 10:1, the original Greek text of John had no chapter breaks.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was addressing the religious leaders at the end of what we call chapter 9, and he is addressing them in chapter 10. Um, and that made me think of, like, it really isn't Jesus who is gatekeeping all
Mm-hmm.
these checkpoints. It is all these people who have
Yeah.
already gone through this process. And particularly in my case, like, a lot of these people are the standard golden poster child of what it means to be a candidate or a pastor. And it is them who is saying, you are the thief and you are the robber, and
Mm-hmm.
you must go around the other way. Um, which I
Yeah.
it's just very interesting.
Yeah, I mean that's like you said, so the NIV version adds the Pharisees there. I've heard other translations add the Judeans,
Yes.
speaking to the whole crowd. Because every time Jesus is doing that, he's giving a very public address.
Hmm.
Which is a problem, right? So this is what we hear in chapter 9 is they're like, listen, the Pharisees are like, anybody that follows that guy is like excommunicated from the temple. You can't come anymore. And so this is what they're doing is they're practicing this gatekeeping thing.
Right.
And so this is what Jesus is challenging. This is what he's challenging to them. He is calling them, you're the ones that you think you get to decide who's this and who's that, who's in and who's out. That's not how it works.
Right. And I think it's so often in settings of religious, like where there is a religious authority, it's almost like a double standard. Like we
Oh, I'll just say there's legal discrimination.
right,
And I say it in that way because all the United States in it itself federally as well as states all have some form of like a non-discrimination clause depending
right,
on where you live. That's different. I particularly and I live in South Carolina where gender identity and sexual orientation is not a protected class. However, it is in Maryland where I just moved from. So why we left we don't know. I still have people that ask that question. um And this is what like a lot of hot debates that are happening right now is the overturning of Roe v. Wade really kind of opened the floodgate for states to start challenging all of these what we thought was kind of drove into law. And like so it wasn't just abortion, right? Like there were these other things about people that they thought were protected that all of a sudden the Supreme Court decided, nope, let's open the floodgates. Anyways, all that to say, churches as religious organization are exempt from this.
Right.
Which means it doesn't matter, like even in Maryland where they have these clauses, that does not apply to churches.
Right.
Because for religious reasons, you can say that we discriminate on these bases. And I just think I'm like, what would this, if we're going to talk about the good shepherd who is nurturing and taking care of and leading the flock to nourishment and protecting them at night, like if we're going to use this kind of imagery and then
Right.
not pit against the Pharisees of doing this kind of gatekeeping, well, where are we on that scale?
Yeah.
Are we Pharisees? Is that because
I mean, we all like to think we're not.
right, that is true. Every
That's
Christian.
that's the whole point of being a
No, I do
Christian,
it right. Yeah.
is that people can say, no, 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 I'm doing it right and you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And I think having that is not, it's another unhelpful addition to the question of, is this what Jesus would want?
Yeah.
Because when we focus on that, I think well, I mean, I think it's pretty easy to see that this is not what Jesus would want, is religious leaders checking other people's baggage at the door and saying, yeah, like this is just too heavy for us. You have to go elsewhere.
Yeah.
Um, but then again, I've also been on Twitter lately, so so like, I mean, I've seen a lot worse than that.
It's a scary place to be these days.
Yeah, I mean, I find some shelter and some good Twitter users,
Tweeters?
tweeters. Yeah. But then there's the shaky ones, so you really got to watch out. It's a scary world.
Yeah.
But I really think when we examine ourselves, and even in my own practice, my own theology, I see myself doing that a lot. But
Like
of like,
what?
of saying, oh no, I'm doing this better. Like, I'm
Yeah.
living the way that Jesus wants us to. But when I take a step back and examine that and like journal about it, talk to a trusted friend about it, I'm like, oh, that's exactly what was not supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Um, and I think having that self-examination, especially for me right now in these formative events, classes, situations, it's been really helpful because if I'm examining that now, I'm gonna hopefully be examining that when I get into a parish, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I will tell you from like a parish standpoint, it's really hard to balance, right? Because you come in and everyone has their different preconceived notions of what this is supposed to look like, right? Like what does it mean to be a good sheep?
yeah,
Because I think, that's the idea is that we're supposed to be the sheep in this, right? And so everyone's got their different expectations of what this is built on, their own life experiences, built on how many years of different pastors saying other things. I think also a lot is influenced by media
yeah,
and crappy mainstream Christianity there. And so like when you come in and you're trying to have these conversations, it's a whole nother level of trying to work through with people. Well, who
yeah.
really is the thief and the bandit?
hmm And I think, like, I had a professor recently who shared she had a Bible study that in the dead winter of Minnesota, no one would come to because it's hard to drive. But when she started and announced that she was going to do a series on Revelation, suddenly she had 18 people showing up in the middle of snowstorms to come and be present and learn. And I think when we take the Bible in its context to the parish,
Yeah.
it can be a bit surprising because as I mean, I don't remember being taught to read the Bible directly in context. There were chunks where it was like, this is what came before, and this is where Jesus or whatever they were talking about in the Hebrew Bible are going, but never did they walk me through like a whole book and say, this is the historical context, this is the socio-political context. Um, and I think it can be surprising to people who also have not been taught that way
Mm-hmm.
that there's context that makes the stakes in Jesus's time higher.
I think that might be some flawed teaching in seminary, because I was actually also taught in seminary, hey, don't say these things like in your sermon ever. People don't want to hear that.
Right.
And I found that to be incredibly not true. People
Right.
want to hear that. They want you to show them that stuff that's in the background there.
Right. Well, and I was meaning that like I wasn't taught that prior to seminary, and I'm now being taught that in seminary that people do want to hear that. Like
No, I
I
agree that they do. I was given the opposite advice.
oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think
And also, I'm going to challenge you a little bit as one of your confirmation teachers. You were given some of that information. You just
hey,
weren't listening.
hey, I was a very busy little guy. There's a lot happening.
You watch really cool little Sparkhouse videos that laid that all out there for you.
I was talking with someone the other day about this Rob Bell video we watched once.
Which one? I love the Numa videos.
It was a Numa video. He was on the metro.
Those came out when I was that young.
It was about using the name of God as a breath prayer.
Oh, I don't know
And
that
so
one.
using each letter of I can never say it.
Tetragrammaton.
That one as like a breath practice, and I was like, hmm. And the other day I texted, not the other day, it's been months probably since I texted John Fry about it, but I was like, do you think that's a little like that feels a little iffy to me? And he was like, maybe it was. I don't remember. Um,
I think there's also things that you realize you're like, I don't want to come up with a lesson plan. We're just going to watch videos today.
yeah, that's
Isn't that
kind of
like
what,
every teacher everywhere uses that method
right.
sometimes?
Oh, completely. Um,
Some are better than others, though. I do appreciate that, like, Sparkhouse came out with a lot better materials than everyone
right.
relying on Rob Bell for 15 years.
Although that is like I remember that video very clearly because I remember using it for years, like that practice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I completely forgot where we were.
That's okay. We get off topic, and usually it's my fault. I chase the squirrel. You gotta like
I mean, me
follow
too.
it, bring it back. No, I'm just
Right.
kidding.
Full
Um,
circle.
yeah. So, I will say though about this text when we talk about, putting in that background information and stuff like this, something that's also important to understand, and I'm pretty sure I've said this like a billion times, so the audience can be like, stop talking about the Gospel of John. That the Gospel of John is different than the other Gospels. And we do get a little bit of a hint in here of this. So this language here in verse 6, where he says, Jesus uses this figure of speech. It's essentially kind of like when he tells a parable, right? But it's different. And so particularly this word, the figure of speech, is different than the word parable. So a parable is kind of a mistranslation. The word that he uses is actually more linked to the wisdom literature. I think
Mm,
particularly one that Ben Sira liked to use. But to say, which means nothing to most people if they're not Catholic, because we consider a lot of those apocryphal books.
mhm.
Um, But to say that the author of the Johannine books, telling a different story, but in a way of understanding that, like, so like the synoptic gospels are like they're telling the story of Jesus's life and of his ministry, right? This is a wisdom literature. So what it's
Right.
meant to be is this more lofty book of wisdom that also includes that, tells that wisdom through the lens of Jesus. And you really get that, especially like John 1, the word is God and the word was with God and the word was in the beginning and with, you get that. This is how the author of John writes. Great. And so we hear that. So this parable is different, right? It's not a parable, it's a figure of speech. It's more of a saying, a veiled saying. So would have been probably familiar to the audience. Even though it says here that they don't understand, right? And so like who's they? That's kind of very indistinguishable that we don't know. Usually it's just put in there so that Jesus can explain what he's saying. Which he does. And so we only get a first part of that explanation. He keeps going on for the rest of the chapter. But mostly it's in response to the Pharisees.
Yeah, and I think another interesting thing is that the only other time that thief is used in the gospels, um, this form of thief is used only in the gospel to describe Judas,
Hmm.
the disciple who betrayed Jesus.
Yeah.
Air quotes,
Yeah.
general gestures about that.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, we should have a whole episode just on Judas because there's a lot.
I have a lot of feelings about Judas.
I actually, and maybe I could share it, but I actually in seminary wrote a really good sermon that kind of like defends Judas.
Oh, I would love to hear that.
It's not one that I ever preach in a congregation because it doesn't like come up in the lectionary. And
Right.
like that might be a stretch and a bounds for some people who they're like, wait, no. Judas is the villain. What do you mean? So anyways, but just throw it out
Well,
there.
when you're ready for like your Judas episode, we could just have like a huge panelist and you could just like ask everyone what they think about Judas.
Yeah.
Because I have feelings, but the bandit language is used to describe Barabbas, who people chose over Jesus to be set free. Um, Thank you, Lutheran Study Bible, for your
Mm-hmm.
many gifts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
I believe the Gospel of John commentary is written by Caroline Lewis in that book.
oh, I hadn't looked because I don't know,
Well,
but you're probably correct.
if you at the very beginning of the book, it kind of tells you who does all the commentary. This, by the way, if you're not a pastor, you probably don't care about this at all. The very beginning of the book does say who wrote the commentary for each book. Most of them are seminary professors. So you'll
That's
probably recognize some
wild.
names in there. There are seminary professors. Some other ones are also just you'll see college professors as well.
I love that for them. Yeah, no, mine doesn't. It must be a super older version. Oh, wait,
No,
yeah,
it's
no,
in
it
there.
does. Um, Caroline Lewis, yeah. Yeah, I don't see any of my current professors. I do see someone who taught at Trinity before, Mark Allen Powell, who is a publishing man. Um, yeah. So I just thought that was interesting, especially because I related to the thief and the bandit a lot. And
Ooh, that reminds me. So let's go back to Barabbas
yeah,
really quick. I just posted this recently on during Holy Week on the podcast Facebook of Faces about where did I put it? A great commentary article from he's called the Unholy Father. Um Father Nathan, kind of talking about Barabbas and sort of the stuff with him, of sort of like him being a political revolutionary,
Mm,
and kind of the pitting of like Jesus coming in peace, and these people are all fired up for some kind of revolution. And so this guy was in prison for inciting the political riots. And so they didn't want Jesus's peaceful way.
mhm,
They were angry. They wanted riots.
mm.
So they picked that guy.
Wow. I'm gonna have to read that later.
It's pretty good. That might be down a tangent a little bit, but understanding, I think it's context, right? It's understanding where the people themselves are coming from and what they're doing.
So when it came time to choose between Jesus, the Prince of Peace, or Jesus, the violent insurrectionist, they
Mm-hmm.
chose the latter.
Yeah.
Dang. That hits different, as the kids say.
Mm. Well, I mean, but then also, so we use this, that language here then to kind of like pit up this is the bandit, right? Or this is, this is the way not to do it. That does give us some other hints then about what is the way, right?
Yeah,
Jesus way. What is this way? So if we're picking not the way of violence, but the way of peace.
right. Which is, I think people often think of peace as a very calming thing, but in the same way that peace is used, like peace with Jesus to me has a duality.
Mm-hmm.
There's the peace of being with, abiding with Jesus, and there's also the peace of sitting silently at a protest or um like that's the best example I can think of for some
Well,
reason.
it's
Like,
we've talked about this before, sort of like peace isn't just calm, peace is like the presence of justice and
right.
equitability. That's what it truly means to be at peace. And
Yeah,
so yeah, when you look at it that lens, it's sort of like, oh, okay, well, what would be the approach that Jesus would take to those?
right. And I like some of the biggest moments of peace that I've had are sometimes in the most loud spaces.
Mm.
Um, so I think sometimes Jesus's peace is,
Well, so
a
this
little
is, I think it goes directly in relation to Barabbas, right? Of really understanding what this kind of peace means. So, like
right.
Jesus was so committed to this version of peace, of understanding what it meant to be justified, that like he literally gave his life for it, right? That
Yeah.
that was his approach. It wasn't a violent insurrection. It was the self-sacrificing way.
Mhm. And when we love, like Jesus loved, sometimes it is self-sacrificing, um, within reasons and boundaries that keep people safe,
Mm-hmm.
which I like to believe Jesus was also very concerned about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can get that from his imagery here, right? That he says, that puts himself as the gate, or as the shepherd, right? Like their job is to keep them safe. So the idea of like bringing them into the sheepfold, like this is where they would spend the night, right? And then during the day, you open the gate so that the sheep can go out to pasture and that they are led, so that they can be fed and nourished, right? Like this is it's a both, right? So the idea of the shepherd here is not only are you keeping them safe, but you're also leading them.
Right.
And so where are you leading them? You're leading them to nourishment. You're leading them to life in abundance, right? That's a very Johannine concept of this abundant life thing. And it's not, we've talked about this a lot too. It's not like this abundant life, far off in the future after you die, right? The
Right.
idea is that this is an abundant life right now. This is,
Right.
this idea.
Right. And I think out of everything, that is most beautiful is being able to imagine and hopefully live into. that Jesus imagined and wanted for us abundant life in the here and now.
Mm-hmm.
Even and in his peace here and now. So that's the T. The 411 on the Gospel of John.
It's all about abundant life.
And how we choose to live in it.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's, yeah. So we have the verse 10 here that you may have life and have it abundantly. This is like, obviously, but sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I think it and I'm like, yeah, that's the point, right? And it's only until I stop and examine like how this has been taught in various places and times and types of churches that I'm like, oh, you can read this very, very differently if you want to. And I think what's important to understand is, like you said, like what it would have meant in this day and time in the audience that it was given to. And they would have understood that, right? And so also to say that this life here, it's Zoe. This Zoe, I think we just talked about it a couple weeks ago. This is to be animate. This is literally to have breath, to be alive. That's what this is. To have an abundance of the life. So obviously that requires nourishment. It requires strength. For those that are really looking into you really like good Eucharistic kind of metaphors and connections, this is a good one, especially last week that we kind of shared and talked about the same word Zoe with our guest Jess, and talking about Martin Luther saying that, like this food of the communion is like the new food for the new creature. It's meant to nourish and sustain. Right? So this is this abundant life that we're being given here and now, and we're nourishing and sustaining this life that we are being given through Christ. We don't take communion for something after we die, right? Like we take it,
right.
And we take it as often as we can to have these benefits, this edification now. And that's also the language, right? This isn't say, I came that they may have life later after they die. I came that they may have life. This is a present thing that's happening, this abundant life. Right. And so what does it mean for us to have a abundant life, right? And so for you sharing kind of your story of like, living your authentic self and how you live into that, into your faith, like that's it. Like that's it, man. That's the goal, right? Like,
yeah. And I think especially living in a city, like I see so many people who don't have abundant life, people who don't have access to food, shelter, water. And this is a huge part of why I want to continue to feed people, find them places to exist without fear of being pushed out in the morning or anti-houseless architecture being set up overnight. Like, because Jesus told us that he provides life and life abundantly. And I think that no one should have to not have that.
Yeah.
I feel like that's...
Yeah, and how in the giving of it generously, I think that also is related to, the entire, if we take the whole story, right, starting at the beginning of chapter 9, why is this man blind? Is it his sins or his parents? It doesn't work like that, right? Like,
not at all.
And so that's for Jesus to say, no, this is what it means to give this kind of abundantly. This is what I'm doing here. This is what you should be doing. That's the language that Jesus uses for them. And to me, this, when I hear this and think about this sort of like people being shitty to him because he's blind and sort of like trying to be like, was it his sins or is it his parents' sins that are making him blind? A good example from church history is actually, I think, the AIDS epidemic. there were all these good and faithful people were dying, right? Like, and they still didn't totally understand what was happening, what was going on. And so a good Christian response to like an epidemic of people dying, should be to care for them, to help them, to
Right.
provide support and shelter. And instead, what became the Christian response was to condemn these people, to cast them out, to say, I literally, prominent evangelical church leaders said very publicly that they were being punished for their sins.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, when I read this story and we're talking about these things and what Jesus would do and say and his figure of speech here, I'm like, where? How? How did you understand that to be a good and faithful response to the gospel?
Right. And we saw the same thing with monkeypox. Like
Yeah.
it it speaking to some of the people in the community here at Trinity who were alive um, during the AIDS epidemic and talking about this monkeypox epidemic
Mm-hmm.
um, has just been so enlightening because they will say, like, this is a very toned down version of what happened with
Yeah.
AIDS. Um, and that was frightening.
What
Um,
were some of the things that you guys talked about?
well, we talked a lot about how prominent evangelical pastors were, in this instance, like putting out social media posts of like, oh, like, don't worry about monkeypox. If you are walking the correct way, you won't get it.
Mm.
If you are following God's rules of relational um, values, then you don't have to worry about this thing. Um, like, and actively condemning people who did get monkeypox, of like, those with monkeypox are only those that God does not care for. God has set them aside um, to be like a lesson about what happens when you give in to sin. Um, and I was just like, this is wild. This is wild. Why is this? This is 2023.
Yeah.
Um, at the time, it was more 2022 when we were having that discussion, but still, hey, it's 2022. Wake up and smell the coffee. We're here. We're queer. Get over it.
Well, I mean, amen to that. And I still just absolutely get flabbergasted because I don't understand how someone can think that that's what Jesus would want them to do or say. Where
Yeah,
is the compassion and the care? Like that
right.
should always precede, always. And Jesus even says that I bring you a new commandment.
Love one another.
Like that's it. This is what I need you to do. Okay. It's not hard, guys. I'm going to do all the rest of the work. I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to set everything up. I'm going to make it great. I need you to do one damn thing.
That's it.
That's
That's
it.
it. Like, I'm
And that
gonna
is
go.
still so hard. Like, even just like we can read this right here. They're like, whose fault is it?
Right.
Jesus is like, no.
It's kind of like those TikTok videos where people are like, I'm sorry, can you watch my dog for 1 minute? I have to go polish my bike. And so, like, they leave you with the dog, and there's like a piece of dog food or a treat on the counter. And so you're like watching the dog get near to sniffing it and like chewing on it, but you're not there. You're just watching the video. So you can't like stop the dog from getting the treat. And so the dog gets the treat, and the person comes back in frame and is like, I thought you were going to watch my dog. And you're like, I was watching your dog.
Yeah.
That's a tangent, but that's what it makes me like. I see all these Christians on Twitter, and they really are going out of their way to find queer, trans Christians on Twitter and find new ways to say that we are sinful and awful, and that we can't change the way God made us. And we're like, that's what we're trying to tell you. But, um, and I'm just sitting there and I'm like, Jesus had one thing, like one thing that was important to this man. And here you are. Like, I don't understand. It feels very easy to me. And it's not
Oh, but
easy.
it is so hard. It
Right.
is so hard because, bring that, it also applies to us, right? And loving those people.
I
It
know.
is so hard.
Yeah,
So hard.
it's very hard. And I think a lot of times the easier thing is to dissociate for that moment.
Mm.
Like, you know, whether it's like there's someone in the food pantry line who has a MAGA hat on, or there's someone like a doctor denying you care. Like, in that moment, it's easier to dissociate. The harder thing and the challenge is to not dissociate, be present in that discomfort,
Hmm.
and remind yourself that this person who is sitting across from you or coming up in your line is just as loved as you are by God, and that there is divine within them. Um, Even when that's a really hard thing to wrestle with.
It's so hard.
And I'm sorry.
Why are
There's-
you the worst? Get out of here.
the cat was very distracting. Um,
He also, so he's really good about that. If someone's in here like on Zoom, he knows that they're in a meeting and is very intentionally just an
oh yeah.
asshole about it all the time.
By some miracle, my cats have stayed elsewhere. Um, yeah, called to love people anyway, which is very hard. Makes you feel like I want a margarita. Like, yeah, a hard day's work of loving people, you know? Just gotta have a nice little mark for that one.
This is where I think Jesus is like, oh, guys, like, come on. That's actually, I feel like if I could summarize most of Jesus's figure of speeches, it's like, guys, come on. I think that's exactly what he is doing here and trying to get
Yeah,
them to understand. He's like, all right, I'll tell it to you this way. And then, and if I'll tell it to you this way. Because he's like,
right.
guys, how many different ways do I have to say it?
At least 80. Um, because people are not getting the memo. Um,
And
the,
it's that ongoing the ongoing struggle, right? Of sort of, I think what I think to me what like the nature of human sin really is, and it's
mhm.
the way that we treat one another.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that that's the thing that Jesus is trying to get us to understand over and over, and to get us to understand his role in that, right? That he's like, listen, guys, this is the way it's going to be. This is what I want you to do. And I'm going to show you how to do it, right? To be
yeah.
this kind of, to be this kind of shepherd.
hmm
We
And
maybe we'll figure it out someday.
I mean, I like at the same time, like I have two very different hopes within me. I have a faithful hope that is, yeah, we will. Heck yeah. And then I have a hope of desperation
Yeah.
where like I need us to figure this out because I'm tired and I want to go home. Um, and it's like a hermeneutic of faith versus a hermeneutic of suspicion. Like, are you
You're
assuming
going to have
this?
to explain that for everyone.
Yeah, so I will
You're
do
using
my
lofty seminary language here.
I mean, hey, I'll do my best. I'm a hermeneutic of faith is when you look at the text, the Bible in this case, and in most cases, and you come up with a theology based on something that is physically in the text. Um, like where it says, Jesus says, I give you this new commandment, love one another. That's literally there. You can't
Mhm.
like you can't say that's not in there. However, a hermeneutic of suspicion is a theology or like an academic thought based in subtext. For example, Paul in his epistles talks a lot about labor pains. It could be a very interesting hermeneutic of suspicion to say Paul is really obsessed with labor pains for someone who is a cisgender straight man. What if Paul like wanted to be a woman? Um, but that was not a thing that was possible for him. Um, and it's never stated. Like it's never there's no text that says Paul wants to be a woman. And in fact, there are lots of people who are hurt and traumatized by some things that Paul says about women. And also, he talks a lot about labor pains for someone who claims to be a cisgender male. Well, he doesn't claim. He's dead and gone now, but
I think he's really scared of women. That's always been my take on Paul.
but what if he's scared of them because he wants to be one so bad?
That's yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying, like I have a lot of so hermeneutic of suspicion, hermeneutic of faith. Um, I currently have a hermeneutic of faith about hope that God says Jesus is the hope and there's hope within Christian communities, but I also have a hermeneutic of suspicion that maybe that hope isn't always enough.
Yeah. I'm just still like it's a suggestion that Paul could I love it.
I mean, if the queer Bible commentary editors want to get in touch, I have lots of thoughts, especially that they say nothing about chapter 10.
Right. Like, wait a minute, let's talk about this here. This is where like gatekeeping theology has been huge. Why don't we talk about it?
Like, hello?
Mhm. No, I
Um,
love that. You're right though. And so I just wanted you to explain it. We talk about all the time in this realm of like what I always call it my Bible fan fiction, where I talk
mm,
about all the things that aren't said. Like, did they
right,
really like, we don't know. Right. That's what
right.
I always call it.
Like
Like, we
David
don't
and
know.
Jonathan, Ruth and Naomi.
Yeah. We don't know because it's just never said. There's so much, there's actually a really good so it's called the Book of Longings by Sumant Kid. It's actually it's about it's the story of Anna, Jesus's wife. Because we have this whole chunk of Jesus's life that's never talked about. The assumption is always that he's not married, but we don't actually know that.
Right.
Additionally to that is if he is indeed a sinless, good, and faithful Jew, he would have been married. It would actually have been a sin for him not to be married.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, it's first of all, it's just a super great book that talks about the story of who she is and her journey and her life and how she became married to this man. But it also it also does it also sheds some better light on Judas. It's a really great book. Anyways, but the whole point is like it's in between the lines here. These are we don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Glennon Doyle called it a true masterpiece.
well, there you go. That is all you need to know about that book.
That's it, really.
Um, anyways, I highly recommend that as a good Bible fiction novel.
We're big fans of Bible fiction here.
Same.
Um, we really love writing Bible fan fiction. It's one of our favorite pastimes.
I still
Second,
maintain that's mostly all we do as pastors.
I mean, it's our second favorite pastime because our first favorite pastime is our Pride and Prejudice um club where we watch all the versions of Pride and Prejudice together. So,
That's an interesting, very, very specific interest group you have there.
well, one day we put it on as background noise because we were in someone's apartment doing Old Testament, and eventually background noise turned into what we were focusing on. Um, so it was the 6 hour version by the BBC with Colin Firth, who, oh Lord,
It's pretty great. Yeah.
Oh, my Lanta. So then we just started watching all the versions of Pride and Prejudice, and to this day we have not gotten through them all.
That's actually incredible that there's that many different versions. And that's a very specific, very nerdy thing that I feel like definitely, I'm not surprised that on a seminary campus that would be
Yeah.
an activity.
Yeah. I mean, the same as like watching Jesus Christ Superstar every Good Friday.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
So
That's
like
just like, that's written in the Bible that you have to do that.
it's a requirement of
Mhm.
every seminary student.
I believe it is in Mark 17.
Yeah, actually,
Mhm.
specifically
It's
only
there.
in Mark 17.
That's the only place you're going to find that information. Anyways, that joke also was probably lost on a lot of people. That's okay.
Yeah, we can let it be. They can find out for
They'll
themselves.
figure it out.
Google is free.
It's true. Yeah. All right. Albie, thanks so much for joining us for this conversation this week. I absolutely adored having you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. We should have a beer or a coffee on Zoom sometime.
That'd be great. I'd love it.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Also,
Go
that
team.
you're not old enough, I can have a beer with you. That makes
Yeah.
me feel old. I love it. All right. Well, you can learn more about the 10-Foot Pole Podcast by going to 10footpolepodcast.com and find us on Facebook and Instagram at 10-Foot Pole Podcast and wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Go ahead and subscribe because then you get fun little notifications for new episodes. The 10-Foot Pole Podcast is a ministry of the Delaware Maryland Synod. To learn more, go to demdsynod.org. Take care.